So it's fairly uncommon, in fact I've never seen it ever, is a live edge Rimu with that has been air dried, and quite a big amount of it as well, and at 5 meter lengths, 55 mil thick. You just don't see that every day, so it's pretty cool to work with it. It's a bit hit and miss with the quality, but you know, just trying to pick out the best bits that I can. So I've just used a straight edge to mark a straight line along the board, and then I can just use my skill saw to rip that down pretty straight enough for this anyway. Then I can rip the other live edge off it, and I'll have two roughly parallel edges, and just kind of roughly dress each side. Then I can rip it down the middle and fold that out, and I'll have enough width for the depth of the vanity. Now unfortunately the interior of these boards were not so hot. They are cracks, but they're not right through. They're just kind of stress cracks, but they just don't look very nice. And so I did all that process again, and you can see how nice the Rimu can be when it is clear. So it's just a matter of picking through what I've got. Then I could join the boards and start gluing up the panels. After the panels come out of the clamps, I'll flatten them off in the drum sander. I'm just using a pretty coarse 80 grit to get them flat real quick. And I find the quickest way to get rid of the sanding gouges is just a smoothing plane. And now that it's flat, all I'm doing is literally just smoothing it off, and works really well. I mean, I'll still hit the finished box with 400 grit sandpaper, because that's just what I like to do, but yeah, this works really well. Then I can cut everything to its finished width and length. And mark out for the half-blind dovetails. I like to add a rebate to this kind of joint, because it just helps in assembly, and it gives me a positive place to start chiseling, and I find it actually probably makes a slightly stronger joint. So once that's done, I can just lay out where my dovetails will go. With the tails cut, I can then transfer the marks over to the pinboard, which is fairly straightforward. I'd like to use an old reasonably sharp plane blade. Then using this small router, I'll take most of the waste away. Saves a fair bit of time chiseling. And then after a quick sharpen of the chisels, it's just a matter of cutting back to my lines and taking my time, being a bit careful at cutting the actual pins here. But as long as I keep a slight little piece of my line on the end of the pin, this Rimu being slightly softer will kind of force its way into the dovetail, so it makes a pretty good fit. So it looks like there's a lot of gaps around, but actually what you're seeing is a shadow from the dovetail board being slightly proud of the pins, and that way I can just plane that back down flush when it's all together. But first I take it back apart and add a big rebate on the back for my back panel, and then I have to put a divider in for between the drawers. So I'm just making a stopped dado with the router, so I'll do both panels at the same time using the same straight edge, so hopefully they should line up. So I'll be using a sliding dovetail to fix the center divider in. So I'm just running my dovetail plane in the dado. Of course it's stopped, so the actual dovetail flare out of the groove kind of tapers off as the plane stops cutting. So I just elongate that flared out dovetail where the plane hasn't been able to cut, just slightly. I don't go all the way to the end because I'll glue the front end anyway. Then I can add the dovetail to the divider, which is fairly straightforward. And you'll probably notice some chipping out, tearing out of the back edge. I'm not too fussed because you're not going to see either of the ends of this. Obviously if you were going to see them, you'd use the left hand plane and go backwards from the edge. I could cut the front piece off, which I'm not going to need. And then it's just a bunch of test fits to actually make it fit. And on to glue up, which kind of is just like watching a glue up, really. Now I'm not one for super spreading out of glue with these kinds of joints. You know, it's such a tight joint. You just need some glue in there, and when it is all hammered into place, that glue is going to spread around and find any little nooks and crannies that need to be filled, and that's plenty enough to hold this thing together. I mean, the joint is holding it together, so that's just a bit of insurance. So before I get clamps or anything on this, I want to glue in my back panel of plywood just to make sure that it is square, and this is really the easiest way to make that happen. So I add this and put a whole bunch of screws in, as this will be attached to the wall just by screwing through this back panel into the stud work of the wall. So at this point I could see a couple of gaps, little kind of minor gaps, but so I just mixed up some Rimu dust and glue, and then mainly just got a bit carried away and spread it everywhere, just again as insurance, because that way I didn't have to come back and wait for it to dry again if I needed to. Then I could finally get some clamps on it. Probably didn't need it at this point, but left it overnight. So out of the clamps I could start smoothing off the ends, try and get the joints looking nice. And then I could seal the inside with a couple of coats of Danish oil. And get onto the drawer fronts while that's drying. So I just glued up a couple of pieces of Rimu for that. And then I could get on to assembling the drawers. So I've already pre-cut and painted the base panel piece of plywood. And these are Blum. They're soft closing and push to open drawers, and so that's what that kind of mechanism is on the bottom. It's the push to open piece. And they all clip together pretty quickly. And this is a little synchronization bar which triggers both of the pushing springs at the same time, which is pretty nice. And I can put the runners into the carcass. The right hand side there's an inner drawer, so I just used a spacer block off the bottom drawer to place the runners for that. So after cutting the drawer fronts to the size I think they should be, I could drill the holes for the hardware to attach the drawer fronts. So then I took the drawer front back off and added a kind of a finger pull chamfer onto the top edge, just to make it feel a bit nicer when you pull the drawer out. So as I kind of expected to happen, these big tall drawer fronts have bowed overnight after I fitted them, and which is fairly expected given that it's only being supported down at this point here. So I think what I'm going to do is on the back screw on a cleat. You can see how much it's bowed, which is not actually bowed a lot, but when it's sitting in the carcass it doesn't look very good at all. So I think if I screw these on, obviously I'll have a slotted hole at the top to still let the drawer front move a little bit, and that should pull these in straight, hopefully. So that's that problem fixed. The drawers are almost straight, pretty close, the drawer fronts. Of course, the downside to adding this batten is that I've had to shift back the top inner drawer 30mm, the thickness of the batten, which is a little bit extra to reach in there to grab that drawer out. So if we're lacking a small amount of functionality, the client gets the look they're after, which is really what they wanted, was just to look just like this. And I guess that's what you get when you're working with solid timber instead of particle board and things like that. So pretty good result, I think. And then on to the Danish oil finish. So I won't be able to get any completely installed pictures for a little while because the house is still under construction, and we're just trying to get a little ahead of the game because we've got a couple of other pieces to make for this house. Now if you're wondering, as a vanity, there will be a there will be a vessel that sits on the top of this, and the plumber will sort that out later down the track. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this, guys. See you next time.